So welcome everybody to the second hour of MindShifters Radio. And today is Thursday, May the 11th, 2023. And our call-in number is 563-999-3581. And press 1, and that puts you in the queue to talk to us. And I'd love to hear your comments and questions. We would love to hear your comments and questions, as it makes this your show. And Susan, I'm going to unmute you for just a second and let you know that I was able to find that book for 49 cents on the Google Reads or whatever on the play.google.com, The Story of the Yara, and it was only 49 cents. So anybody that's interested in looking for that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, isn't it a lovely story, and it captures something essential about human nature in there that's it's magical and bewitching. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, and it shows what jumped out at me is that the true love was more powerful. And
yes,
so
isn't
when
that
we
the best?
Yeah, it is. So when we can tap in to the love that we are, to God, to love, then we can overcome all the other obstacles. So I thought that was pretty good. So it's an ebook.
Pretty
so,
good.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Did you get it?
So,
it's a whole series, the Green Book of Fairy Tales or something, right?
Well, this one is actually a book. It's only 35 pages. And it actually says it's Baba Lodaba Children's Stories.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, The Story of the Yara, a Brazilian fairy tale. And the picture on the front of it is a guy sitting on the ground and a girl beside of him with the conch shell in her hand.
Oh, nice. So they caught them.
So I look forward, for the cover of it.
Yeah,
and it was actually published in London in 2018. This version anyway.
Wow,
so
interesting.
So I look forward to reading it. Although you've told us about it, and it's awesome. And thank you for sharing that.
You basically know the story, but it's beautiful. It's just
it is. And Michael's joined us now, so I'm going to say welcome, Michael. I'm going to leave you on, but
so much beauty in the world. It's amazing.
Yeah.
If we choose to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. I was talking to someone earlier today, and they were talking about, let's see, what was the word? They were talking about the Creator, and just after some conversations condemning some people, moved into how much they loved adoration of God. And I pointed out that there might be a little bit of conflict in that to condemn the creation, but you want to do adoration of the Creator, and that perhaps emulation might be a better word than adoration, that we're going to emulate the Creator space rather than do one thing in our action, but then pretend that, adoration is what we're doing with the Creator while condemning the creation.
That's great. Good word substitution.
Certainly appropriate to hold actions in the creation accountable if they're destructive to the creation, but condemnation of, that's, I think, a little different game. Accountability, yes, absolutely. And there's certainly lots to be held accountable going on in the culture.
No kidding.
So how are you this morning, young lady, or this afternoon? What's exciting in your world?
Well, I'm much, much better. That fatigue that you thought was part of a healing crisis, and it may well have been, was also a severe reaction to the statin drug, and I probably told you that too. I went off of it. The cardiologist guy said, go ahead off for 2 weeks. I don't think that's what's the matter, but go off and see how you do. 2 days later, I'm back to full steam, and then I got an appointment with a new doctor my internist has been just impossible to get his attention and to get an appointment with him. And I was scared. I made this appointment when I was feeling really dizzy, sick to my stomach, not bad, but just off and exhausted. So I made this appointment, and they stuck me in with this new young woman doctor who said, some of the statin drugs, they vary widely. And she said, I really, with your history, your family history, I recommend you being on a statin drug, but I can have you try a much milder one that has fewer side effects. And I've gotten a manuscript on the pros and cons of statin drugs, and I'm going to give her a hard time because the prescription has been filled, but I haven't taken a pill yet. I haven't even gone to get it because I just don't know. She said when you're pre-diabetic, you've got a family history of heart disease, cholesterol, clogging of the arteries. What else did she say? Blood sugar issue, pre-diabetes, and stroke. My mother had mini strokes starting at age 80, and I'm coming to her age, and she had low blood pressure, and suddenly it became very labile. So she said, with all of that, this is the most amazing drug. It's an anti-inflammatory. It generally just extends people's lives wonderfully. And, of course, I'm sitting there believing every word and totally sold. And then I get home and I think, hey, wait a minute. I want to look at everything here before I put a pill in my mouth. And, of course, you're going to die of something. I mean, I know you don't feel that way, Michael, but I figure, what's the big deal if I took a pill that wasn't quite right for the last 15 years max of my present incarnation? What difference does it make? I know I'm going off on this medical thing. But anyway, I feel great. Thank you for asking.
Sweet. Sounds like your guidance is right on track, and if you're feeling great, certainly leaves a big question mark to go from feeling really lousy to feeling great because you took something out of your life and somebody wants you to put it back in again. It's like,
I know. I'm looking at it. I wish I understood it all, but I've got this manuscript that the new man on our Zoom is a scientist and brilliant.
Right.
And he sent me. He is the one who said, you're awfully tired. Are you taking a statin drug? He says to me. And I said, how did you guess? And he said, because I'm 84 and I was put on one and I could hardly get out of bed. And he said, you may have what I did. Check. And he saved me. I would never have made the connection. I just thought I was really getting old fast. So anyway, he sent me this manuscript and said it's long and it's filled with medical terms, but you can sort of glean, what you need to know here. Have a read. I appreciate that. So haven't read it yet, but it's home.
Well, I personally think that there are places where some of those pills can be appropriate, but I think in the background, the conversation has to be the recognition that every drug is a disease, or actually more appropriately, a series of diseases disguised as a cure.
Mm-hmm.
If that's in the background and you're aware of that, then it's a different standard of risk evaluation as to what are the pros and cons of taking this disease-causing substance, which might help some of my symptoms. But are my symptoms that important? It's definitely a weighing process, and there are certainly places where they're appropriate. But
yeah, it's very hard. I do wish there were a better dialogue and much more reciprocity and kind feelings between allopathic medical people and the alternative medical people. It's just so confusing for the average Joe like me out there who's listening to everybody. I mean, my internist got mad at me because I took ivermectin when I got COVID because my regular doctor was unreachable for a week. And then he was horrified that I'd done this. But my nutritionist is a brilliant woman who healed herself of crippling Lyme disease using her own methods because modern medicine was no help to her. So, who do you listen to?
Well, there's this power within us that Yeshua says this is the most important connection to maintain. And when you've got that live voice in you, then you've got an edge on everything and everybody. But that's not something that's very respected in the world. In fact, it's poo-pooed as silly and stupid, and you have to look to the authority and the expert. Not necessarily true.
Well, people talk about muscle testing as a way of finding out what's best for you by yourself, and I've never been any good at that. But that would be a wonderful tool. Do you use it?
Early in my career of study, I started to engage in muscle testing. And what I found is that, or what for me it was, that it's just telling you what your body already knows. And if you develop the ability to listen to your body, you're going to be a lot better off than if you put something in between it, even if it is, the muscles of your own body. So my take is to become more, go direct to the source. And again, there's a whole other level of responsibility when you do that. A lot of people are whining and complaining about the government taking over here and the government taking their power away. Well, when people don't want to be responsible for their lives, somebody's going to step in and take over. That's just, the vacuum is going to be filled. And we're willing to be responsible. And sometimes in our responsibility, we might make mistakes, and it might cost us, and the cost might be quite high. But at what point do you, where do you draw the line? And that's, of course, a totally and completely individual choice. So holding the space that your guidance is right exactly on track.
Thanks. So my guidance is...
Can you have a back and forth dialogue with your son, who's got awareness of all these things? Is there an opening for you to take a contrary position with him and be treated lovingly, gently, and with respect?
Oh, sure. He'd be good. He's on a drug too, and he's not having bad side effects. He says he's fine. I don't know why he's on. Maybe he has cholesterol problems too. He's not overweight or anything, and I don't think he's diabetic. But anyway, I don't want to just take up the whole show talking about my medical issues.
Well, what would you like to take up some of the show talking about, young lady? What else is on your mind?
Well, I already did spend the whole hour with Dr. Tim. He was great. I told him I did the MindShifter you did me. I shouldn't say I did it. I am doing it. It's safe and healing to express anger toward my mother. And I'm getting nowhere, and we discussed why. I've written 5 pages, single-spaced, of all my arguments why it is not safe for healing or even possible. It's not there. And I'm aware of anger at my sister, for instance, who was the recipient beside me of my mother's rage. I'm aware of my sister doing what she does to get what she wants in life, and I don't approve of a lot of it. There's a lot of garbage in there, Michael, but I'm not anywhere near being able to report on it.
Well, how about we adjust it a little bit?
All right.
Let's go for another one. This one may sound pretty dramatic, but sometimes to get the mind to let go, it takes something dramatic. So how about, it's safe and healing, and I love it. When Mom uses the riding crop on me.
I'm not home, and I'm
confronts.
On my phone. Okay.
Well, I'll send you a text.
No, that's okay. I'm typing it in.
Oh, okay.
For my
cool.
Okay. Yeah.
So that might
good.
confront your mind in a little different way and get it to spit up whatever needs to be looked at.
Great. I really already feel that there's something to work with there. That's good. I got it. So it's safe and healing for me, and I love it when my mother uses the riding crop on me. That's it, right?
Yes. That's it.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And just let that, all the memories related to that, come to the surface and sort through them and see what needs to be forgiven.
All right.
You know, if you look at those 5 pages that you've written with the other mind shifter, if you look through it, is there anything there that would be appropriate that you've written in those 5 pages to use any of the other tools that you've got on? Like, you know, maybe with the answer on the 3rd line, it's, well, I need to go to the mirror and do a love exchange with myself. Or maybe on line 5, I need to take a picture of my mother out and do the commitment with her, really sincerely, deeply in my heart, do the commitment with her. You know, and just look through and see if there are places where, you know, oftentimes there are dramatic consequences to an unresolved energy, but the unresolved energy itself is not dramatic. It can be, you know, several misplaced energies that are in different, that seem to be different, but come together as, you know, what we would call a belief. So an individual thought disorder is just a thought. But when you add 6 of them together, and they're all different shades of thought disorders, but they correlate with each other, that then becomes a belief and can have a profound impact on the mind. And so that might be useful to go through those 5 pages and just look, are there any subtle things here that, you know, I've got a tool, something I know to do with that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Another powerful thing to do can be to invite someone, especially if there's anybody in your environment that resonates your mom for you, and have a dialogue with her. Or him, if there's anybody that... Oh, did you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it bombed, but that's because I'm not clear enough. Yeah, go ahead. Keep telling. I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that was my thought. Take every tool you got and let's get in and clean this one out. Who knows? One of these little pieces of the puzzle might change the way your body processes and deals with cholesterol.
It might be. Yeah.
And some blood tests don't distinguish with the types of cholesterol that the body's dealing with. You know, there are large molecule and small molecule cholesterol particles that, well, in many blood tests, they come out in the same category. They therefore look like they're the same, really aren't the same at all in terms of their threat level or their destructive level.
Yeah.
And so that might be worth looking at as well.
I don't think the doctors are thinking about that, but I do think the nutritionists probably are. But anyway, whatever. Yeah. I know that we need the fats that we're using, that we're eating, and I eat a pretty fat-free diet. So she said, my internist said, it's just your hereditary. You've got it, and it came down into your genetics or whatever it is. Probably not anything you're doing wrong at all, but you lean toward this. Mm.
And hereditary energetic patterns are nothing more than reflections of thought disorders. And when they're resolved, it will change the way the structure reflects them. Would be my offering.
Okay, that sounds good and reasonable.
So joining you and holding the space for the next level of opening and healing to surface and move through. So anything else on your mind for today?
Oh, no, I don't think so, Michael. Thank you.
All right. We appreciate you, dear heart.
Thanks. You too.
All righty. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
So, Miss Jeanie, we are about 20 minutes into the show. Today we've got the Hear My Voice. I was getting the title of it. Hear My Voice Book Club at 3:30 Eastern Time. And that's 8:30 in London, England, where that book club takes place. And we're doing Chapter 3 on the book, Words Could Never Say. And that chapter is about the idea that, and if anybody would like to join us, then I'm sure Jeanie has already put a link into the website or into the notes for today for the Hear My Voice Book Club. So you're welcome to click that link and join us. And Chapter 3 in the book, Words Could Never Say, really reflects the fact that our words represent constructs of the mind that are in common expression in the culture. And those things that have come into common experience are assigned words. And if you look at the outcome for much of the planet, when you realize that we're designed to be eternal beings, and the average person thinks I've done really well if I live to be 90, then perhaps there are some things that would be fantastical that people are buying into because we've got words for them, and we think they're true. And you go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and the situation was no different then. There was a level of language being used, and there were people who were clamoring and chattering and give us answers. Tell us, tell us, tell us, tell us, tell us. Reply was, there are so many things I would say to you, but you can't hear them. The only words we recognize are words that we have brain cells for. And there are so many fantasies that are structured by the mind that are in common experience. So everybody thinks they're facts, agrees they're true, when they're just totally, completely false. Now, some of those fantasies are useful. You know, like we have a fantasy in our culture that the sun comes up in the morning and the sun sets at night. And that's just silly with the way we understand what we now know about the universe. We know the sun doesn't rise at all. We know that the earth spins on an axis, and when our portion of the earth is in the view of the sun, then we have sunshine. But it didn't rise. The earth turned to expose us to it. But we still say that. I mean, you know, go look on your phone, and virtually everybody's got a phone, and everybody's got an app on their phone for weather, and just take a look at it, and it says sunrise is at, you know, whatever, 6:02 or whatever. Now, that's just a silly statement. It's so silly, but notice that every phone in the world has that in it. And virtually every, I mean, have you ever said to somebody, oh, I wonder what time the sun comes into view as the Earth spins on its axis? Nobody says that. They say, what time is sunrise? No, that's not a harmful fantasy. It's a fantasy. It's not a harmful one. The harmful fantasies that we have language for. And what about the useful truths that we don't have words for yet because our fantastical thinking doesn't allow us to experience the truth? What would happen if we got rid of all of the destructive fantasies in our lives? Like, for instance, the common fantasy of, oh, he really made me mad. He really hurt me. Well, that's just as fantastical as the sun rising. But virtually everybody's doing it. I mean, you know, go read 1,000 books by different therapists, and so many of them will offer this fantasy by asking people the question, how did that make you feel? As though something outside of us could possibly cause something inside of us. It's a fantasy to think that something can make you feel anything. But that's what's common in the culture. So the question of this particular chapter, which is chapter 3 in the book Why Is This Happening to Me Again, that we're studying with the Hear My Voice book club, is about what we buy into with words, and can the truth about anything actually be spoken in words? We think it can. But if words are reflective of what's in common experience, what's in common experience is killing the average person on the planet before they're 90 years of age. How much truth is there in it? What do we need to let go of? What do we need to forgive? Remembering that forgive means remove. How different would our lives be if every word actually represented an accurate fact about the actual world, rather than represented a perceptual construct of the mind reflective of some past experience? So that's kind of the direction we're going to go with the Hear My Voice book club today. And if you want to join us, click the Zoom link that's in the notes for today. Or if you go to our website, whyagain.org, and you look under events, there'll be a link that you can click and join the book club. We'd be delighted to have you be there. Beyond that, Miss Jeanie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room? Or any questions from the app?
I've not received any emails. Yank is with us in the chat room, and there's
hey, young lady.
hands up on the switchboard. Yeah.
Well,
we
Yank
have
and I have
30
been
minutes.
communicating. Yes. Yank and I have been communicating about the questions to ask regarding this chapter as we present it today. So, Yank, if you have any thoughts to put in the chat room, you could let us know what they are, and or if just that brief synopsis I've given you of this chapter, Words Could Never Say, what does that resonate for you? What moves in you? What resolves in you, or what confusion shows up in you when you hear those ideas expressed in words? And if you have any thoughts about anything there that I've just said, it'd be cool if you'd push one and have a conversation with us. And if you're on one of those stations where we can't see you in our control panel, then if you dial into the show, if you call into the show number is 563-999-3581. If you call that number, you'll be listening directly to the show on your phone. And then, if you push 1, we will be having a conversation. And I would love to have a conversation with you. I'd love to know what's on your mind. I'd love to know what's happening in your world. I'd love to know how we can support you. Or if you have any questions on the refinements of forgiveness and this whole inquiry, this whole process that we're entering into. So push 1,
in the
let's talk
chat
about it.
room. She says, looking forward to tonight. This chapter was really challenging for me as perfect example. I had read the first few lines wrong, and it took me a while to realize it. Makes me think of that time that you had someone in a workshop and they read a line like 5 times before you had to point out what they were skipping.
Exactly. Yeah, well, actually, there have been situations like that, but the one that came to mind when you mentioned that, and this was several years ago, I was up in Toronto, Ontario, and doing a workshop, and the workshop was on creating consciously, and we're talking about mind shifters, and so I handed out a sheet with some mind shifters on it, and I had people reading picking one and reading it, and it was going around the circle, and a woman read what it said, or at least what showed up in her mind as her perceptual construct. And she had inserted words that were not there. They weren't on the page. And so I asked her to read it again, and she read it again, and she inserted the same words. And, of course, everybody's looking at her because everybody's got the same piece of paper, but those words aren't there that she is reading from the page. And so I asked her to point to the words on the page as she read them, which she did. And she read words that weren't there. So perception can be a tricky thing. And that's why the knowledge of how to collapse perception, especially when there's some form of pain or trauma going on, is such a benefit, because it's a way to access the underlying dynamic of pain and challenges in our lives and rectify them. So, Yinka, perhaps you could share a little bit about what was different than what you read, how that changed for you. That might be a good example. And it might spur a little more conversation and clarity on the questions to ask in the PowerPoint that you're developing for today's show. I really appreciate, and for those that don't know it, Yinka runs the Hear My Voice book club out of London, England. And we've been working with Yinka now for probably a year or so. And in doing the book study, she has been coming up with and creating a PowerPoint. Yinka's been becoming more deeply engaged in this work at every session and teaching it, carrying it forward as she's applying it in her life. And so she has been really enhancing her comprehension of the work and her ability to present it as she creates a set of PowerPoint slides with comments, awesome graphics, always a graphic that's just right on track for the point that we're making with the book. And so much appreciation for that, Yinka, that skill you have. It's awesome.
She just wrote and said because she read the first few lines wrong, she couldn't understand the rest of the chapter. And once she got that correct, then she understood the chapter. She said tonight's session is a great way of understanding perception and the impact it has on their life, which has been a great eye-opener for me.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, virtually everybody in the world still believes that they look out through their eyes and see something happening in the world, that everything they see happening in the world is actually happening in the world instead of happening inside of them. When you realize that perception is just a construct and reflection of the mind, we've never seen anything outside of us with our eyes, and we never will, because the eyes are not two-way devices. They're a one-way valve. Information comes in, and you can't look out through them. It's just not possible. And what that means is that you've never seen anything with your eyes. Eyes don't see. Eyes bring in light energy. That's all. They're an antenna for light. Information is carried in that light energy, and that information resonates or causes certain brain cells to fire. And the brain cells that fire in us are what produce this thing called perception, this construct called perception. And based on that, that's where I come from with the fact that we only have words for what's in common experience. If enough people are experiencing a certain construct, a certain perception, then we make up this series of grunts and groans that we call words, and we say, oh, that's what that means. But in fact, what the word elicits in the mind is simply what's in the mind. And one of the things to really comprehend, one of the things to really get about perception is that it is always a reflection of an internal condition first and foremost. Can perception tell you something about what's happening in the world? Oh, absolutely. Light energy comes in. If accurate brain cells fire, then we can accurately say something about what's happening in the world, as limited as it might be. But the fact that something shows up in our mind as a construct and we think that we're seeing it outside of us is just not true. Can't be done. It's another one of those fantasies. What do we have? Oh, what did you see happen, the judge says to each of the witnesses to the accident. Oh, what did you see? One person watches a television show and says, wow, that was so great. And another person watches and says, oh, that was really terrible. What did you see on the screen? You didn't see anything. Light energy bounced off of the screen. It was organized in a form that your mind understood, and it elicited responses from the content of your mind. And if you liked those responses, you probably say, I liked that TV show. And if you didn't, then you probably said, no, it was lousy. Perception is a really interesting study, a really tricky thing. The CIA did some research on perception. Actually, there's a link on the website that Jeanie put out. And you can download the CIA study from our website. And in that study, and the reason I'm kind of hesitating a little bit is that I'm looking at looking up that quote as we speak. And here's what they say. Here's what the CIA says about perception. Give me 1 second for this file to open. So here's their research on human intelligence. And here's their conclusion, verbatim. This is what the CIA wrote as part of this book that you can download free from our website. Perception is demonstrably an active rather than passive process. It constructs rather than records reality. Perception is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality on the basis of information provided through the five senses. So there's the CIA's conclusion about perception. Now, their conclusion is not true. It's not act. Delve into that a little bit because it's an important refinement. They're right. It's active. It constructs rather than record reality. But when they go on and say it constructs an individual's version of reality on the basis of information provided through the five senses, that's not true. If all that we're given were the information provided by the five senses, then everything that perception brings up would relate to what happened in the world. But what happens is the information that comes in through the five senses resonates content in the mind. If it were the information that comes in through the senses, then everybody would have the same perceptual construct about everything, because we all get the same information coming through, or unless there's some sort of deformity in the receptors, the eye or the ear, what have you. But basically, we all get the same information that comes in. So if that were actually true, following that all the way through, that last detail, then everybody would have the same reality about everything. But we don't, because it's the information that comes in through the five senses that resonate the content that's there. And the variable is the content. So to be 100% accurate, that CIA quote should be that perception is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality on the basis of information provided through the five senses and what that information resonates that is already stored in the mind and in the genes. Now you'd have a more accurate picture. So everything that we see on the window of perception is an interpretation of our own minds. It's really important to recognize that each interpretation tells us more about the content of our minds than it tells us about the world we believe we're looking at. And if what you're experiencing isn't based in love, it's not coming from out there into you. It's not independent of you. So all things are subject to interpretation, which means that all things are subject to the variability of the content in each person's mind that receives that sensory data. And you'll notice that we live in a culture that whichever interpretation prevails at a given time tends more to be a function of power than of truth. So who's the ruling bully on the block? Then everybody has to agree with the interpretation of the king. May not have any clothes on. The king may be totally naked. And our culture teaches us to value and conform to that which has the power, instead of learning to conform with the truth. William Blake, in his book, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, says, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through the narrow chinks of his cavern. In other words, you only get to see what your perceptual mind allows you to see. In the movie The Notebook, which was powerful, Nicholas Sparks speaks these words: we sit silently and watch the world around us. This has taken a lifetime to learn. It seems only the old are able to sit next to one another and not say anything and still feel content. The young, brash and impatient, must always break the silence. It is a waste, for silence is pure. Silence is holy. It draws people together because only those who are comfortable with each other can sit without speaking. This is the great paradox. Powerful film, The Notebook. Haven't seen that in a long time, and I haven't seen it since it came out. Maybe that's one we should put on our list to watch. See, I think it would be cool. Person named Shannon Elder says, your perspective on life comes from the cage you were held captive in. So that will be our conversation. We're going to expand out on that and see how it develops, what it turns into. And if that resonates anything for you, then I would love to hear your voice and have a conversation with you. Again, our call-in number, if you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, is 563-999-3581. Call us. Let's have a conversation. Push 1 and we'll be talking.
Things. One is and I did put a link to the psychology of intelligence analysis in the notes for today. But one of the things they go on to say is, and it's still off a little bit, but what people perceive, how readily they perceive it, is how they process the information after receiving it, are all strongly influenced by past experience, education, cultural values, role requirements, and organizational norms, as well as by the specifics of the information received.
That kind of fits with that quote, actually came from Nietzsche. It said, it's a function of power, not of truth, what people hold in common. So
right.
That is right on track.
And Yinka said it was a very subtle difference, that the chapter starts out and says, imagine a two-dimensional creature. But what she read was, imagine two-dimensional creatures. And so when she made the PowerPoint, she was making two-dimensional creatures, two of them. And so she got really confused on it because, so it was just, instead of a two-dimensional creature, she read it as two-dimensional creatures. And so it totally changed the rest of the chapter, and it didn't make sense. And so when
There's
she
a
realized
whole chapter
that,
in a nutshell.
Yeah, and so
That's
as
awesome.
she was creating the PowerPoint with two separate dimensional creatures, then she had, once she got it, she had to go back and change all the PowerPoints and adjust what she was reading. So, just a very subtle difference.
What a perfect example of the whole idea of the chapter.
Yeah.
Well, you'll have to share that to begin with in the study this afternoon or this evening. And that'll be awesome. Again, the Book Study Club and Yinka are in London, England, so it'll be at 8:30 their time, but it's at 3:30 our time. So if you want to join us, jump on the notes, grab the link, and make sure to join us at 3:30. Be part of the conversation. That's such a great example. Words could never say. That'll be the title of our chapter. Well, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
Oh, no, everything else is all quiet. And I have no idea why this came to mind to share, but since nobody has a hand up, one of our neighbors who we know quite well texted me yesterday and said that the neighbor up above him passed away. And I don't know that neighbor, but I just felt inclined. I went to the grocery store this morning and picked up, a loaf of bread, some sandwich meats, paper plates, napkins, tea, just different things. And I took it to their house when I got back, and they were like so totally shocked. It was like, because I had to introduce myself first and tell them, I live 3 doors down. And they were like, why did you even feel like you needed to bring something? And I said, well, just because I don't know you doesn't mean we're not neighbors. And it's the neighborly thing to do. I said, I lost my dad 6 weeks ago, and I said, the outpouring of people, just being there. And I said, so, now you know who we are. And I said, we're 3 doors down if you need anything. And the mother was sitting on the porch. It was her husband who passed away, and it was the daughter I was speaking to. And, they just both broke down and cried. They couldn't believe that somebody that didn't know them would do something for them in this time. And, so reaching out to other people, and it gave me a real blessing just to do it.
That's sweet. Sweet. While holding space for them, extending love in their direction, that whatever needs to process in that whole family system, with a father and a husband passing, that turns that experience into a blessing for everybody, including the father as he moves on to the next level of his journey. Thanks for sharing that, sweetie. It's touching. It's powerful. Yeah. Well, if we have no hands up, go ahead.
You were talking about perceptions, and another cute example, and we've shared this before, is Aria actually totally understands it. 4.5, having different realities. And the game that you all played and made up of turning a piece of paper upside down or backwards or rolling it up in a circle or whatever and looking and seeing something different. And she'd say, well, my brain tells me da-da-da. And, then you would change it to my reality. And so then she picked up on that and started using reality. But it's, a concept that she's learning at a very early age. I wish that I had known that at that age.
Me too. Wish it hadn't taken me decades and decades to learn that one. Life would have been so different. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're down to the last few minutes, and if nobody has a question or thought, seeing as how Yink and I need to have a conversation, and we've got some things on our plate, I'm going to just say thank you all for joining us, and we'll close the show out, and we appreciate you, and invite you to have the best year yet of your eternal life. Blessings.